A lot of people around the world, particularly in certain countries that have high immigration, like the United States, England, New Zealand, are suffering from high housing prices, low wages, and fewer educational and job opportunities than they really should have. Some of these countries have economic situations that have really not been very fun. Let's start off by looking at housing. Now, houses are expensive. Apartment rentals, condos, those can be just as expensive. And while one landlord who owns, let's say, a single house for rent, he can set his price at whatever he wants. If he sets it too low, he's just missing out on a lot of potential income. If he sets it too high, he might not be able to get it filled. But the market itself is many people, many factors, and it has predictable behaviors, unlike an individual who is hard to predict. Markets themselves are not. And one of the ways we can predict and understand market behavior is through supply and demand. Now, ultimately, on the demand side, every family needs housing. That's the demand. By comparison, a particular food could get labeled a superfood or a carcinogen, and the demand for that food could change a lot. But housing, not so much. Kind of everyone needs it. People are somewhat flexible in where they live. They want to be, let's say, in town, but how near the center of town do they really need to be? They're a little bit flexible. And they generally have a minimum standard of living they'll accept, but no real maximum other than just the fact that it gets way too expensive. If you gave them a mansion for a really low rental price, they'd take it. So demand comes from the population, supply comes from new homes, and also existing homes. And by that I'm talking about the houses, apartments, condos, all of it. Maintaining the supply comes from repairing and updating aging homes, and growing the supply comes from building brand new homes, at least faster than the old ones are getting destroyed in disasters and also just falling into disrepair and stuff like that. In 2010, New Zealand's population was 4.31 million. By 2018, it was 4.88 million. That's a big increase for such a small country. That's 13% increase in population in less than a decade. Increasing your available housing by 13% in 8 years would be quite a feat. And if you're able to crank out housing as fast as people want it, you could keep the price fairly stable-ish. Keep in mind the land itself isn't being created, so the land component of housing keeps going up as population goes up. But with aggressive home building, maybe housing could only rise a little bit, maybe just a little bit more than inflation. Well, how well did they do at keeping up with demand? Wow, I'm showing you a graph here from Rhein's House Price Index. Rhein's is the Real Estate Institute of New Zealand. As you may have heard the news, things are getting pretty expensive in New Zealand in just the last few years. There was a lot in the news with their recent elections and everything. Now, in the United States, in the same period of time, 2010 to 2018, we went from 309 million to 327 million, nearly 20 million new people. Not all population increases are created equal, though. For example, let's just say your population increases just because you have a bunch of kids, right? You have about 20 years or so before you really expect that to impact the housing market in a big way, when all those kids become adults and need their own places. We have some time to try and anticipate and prepare beforehand, right? So if there was like a baby boom, investors would take note of that right away, and they'd use the next couple of decades to sort of be ready. That being said, that's very different than out-of-control immigration, where lots and lots of new families just come in and suddenly need homes, and they eat up all the excess of homes, right? Normally you have some amount of excess. You need excess so that way people can move around. Otherwise, it would be a very rough game of musical chairs. Also, some housing needs to be repaired where people move out of it. And also, it's nice to have a small excess of homes just in case there is a natural disaster. We don't now have fewer homes than what's absolutely needed as a bare minimum. So mass immigration can really drive the prices up in a big way. Now, this is great for home building companies, and I'm not begrudging their success. I'm happy they're making money, but it's kind of bad for most other people. I was looking at the housing prices in Spain. Now, in Spain, their population went from 46.49 million in 2010 to 46.66 million in 2018. So that's an increase of under 200,000 people. Spain hasn't been receiving the same mass immigration as some of the other countries have. I was on the website Global Property Guide and I saw this chart. While it looks like housing prices have been falling pretty big in a few years here, the peak of the decline was in 2012. And while declining home prices isn't great for home builders, let's face it, a lot of our housing prices have gotten out of whack.
You said it, the rent is too damn high.
A lot of young people are really struggling to afford some of the basics, and it's harder for them to get than some previous generations, and that's just not cool. Now, in Spain, the housing prices have come up in recent years, not by too much, and the population hasn't changed too much. So what does this website, Global Property Guide, tell us about the rising prices? Quote, the surge in home sales in recent years was mainly driven by foreigners buying homes on the coast and in cities like Barcelona and Costa del Sol, one of the country's most popular areas with overseas purchasers. Most foreign home buyers are Britons, French, Germans, Belgians, Italians, and Swedes. So that's interesting. It's not just foreigners who move into your country as immigrants who can drive up the housing prices really, really quick, unlike having babies. Even foreigners who stay back in their own country and make purchases can affect the market. Now, this is a big deal because it affects how well our young people can get into the housing market and how much they have to pay for apartments and all that. There's more than one way you need to control your border to prevent foreign influence from hurting your citizens. And I believe we saw that with New Zealand. New Zealand put a bunch of laws in place about foreign interests being able to purchase property. The labor market is also a market. It's affected by supply and demand. If I went and gathered up all the welders in Australia, sent them to New Zealand, suddenly it would be very hard to make a living welding in New Zealand. While in the United States, we've brought over H-1Bs and other high-skilled workers that have affected wages of technicians, engineers, and other technical professions. For the most part, the biggest hits have been to non-technical workers, factory workers, meatpacking plants, farm hands. Their wages have been drastically suppressed. It shouldn't be a surprise that many of the immigration busts happen at meatpacking plants and factories. The Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco published a paper in March 2020, Longer Run Economic Consequences of Pandemics. This is an interesting one. Pandemics reduce a population, right? A disease kills people. So when you look at the effects of a reducing population in a pandemic, there are maybe some lessons you could take to other reasons a population would go down. In countries all across Europe and the United States, if we weren't taking in so many immigrants, our populations would be decreasing, kind of like a pandemic. And in the paper, it shows us this graph. In the abstract of the paper, it says, using more sparse data, we find real wages somewhat elevated following pandemics. The findings are consistent with pandemics introducing labor scarcity and or a shift to greater precautionary savings, end quote. So when the population goes down, real wages go up. Real wages, by the way, is a term that just refers to what your wage can actually get you. So for instance, let's say your paycheck has stayed the same for years and years and years, but the things that you need have gotten cheaper. We would say your real wage has gone up even though the number hasn't. Similarly, if your paycheck were to go up and up and up, but everything was getting really expensive even faster than your paycheck, we would say your real wage has gone down. So if we didn't have this mass immigration, we might have some amount of labor scarcity due to our low birth rates. Large corporations might not like that, but anyone providing labor, maybe you and your neighbors, might be having a better time. And I guess when it comes to choosing between what's good for you and what's good for corporations, the people in government know who is helping them get elected, and it's not you. And it's really sad, too. It's kind of a double whammy on the working class. You have a lot of competition for working class jobs, roofers, landscaping, plumbing, handymen. These should be very decent paying jobs. But the heavy competition for these jobs by immigrants has made these jobs pay a lot less than they should. And the thing is, these immigrants who come in, well, generally they're not competing for Hollywood mansions or large, expensive estates with Washington lobbyists. They're mostly competing for the same housing that working class people are competing for, which drives the prices up. That is a double whammy. Without mass immigration, not only would these working class people maybe get paid a little bit better, they'd find it cheaper for a place to live. But I mentioned there are other problems that we're experiencing in our economy. Are you enjoying this affirmative action? You do know affirmative action never goes away, right? When affirmative action was talked about in the United States originally, or sort of before it became a thing, various supporters talked about how long affirmative action would need to last, maybe 15 years, or one generation. A generation is generally thought of as between 20 and 25 years. In 1976, an African-American judge, Constance Baker Motley, here she is on the screen, she said, quote, "I despise the necessity for reverse discrimination, but I swear to you, we will end it in 25 years, end quote. And that was in 1976. Did we end it 19 years ago? No, it's not going to end. It's not even getting smaller. It's getting bigger. Once affirmative action is in place, it will not end. Do you think this is going to end when whites become a minority? If whites are the one suffering from affirmative action, as we lose political power, are we really going to start getting our way more in the future? Whites are less than 10% of the population in South Africa, and there's affirmative action there for the black majority. Do you think the black majority there is ever going to vote it away? Now, your kid might go to a job interview, right? He's trying to be the best man for the job and to get the job. But this isn't a meritocracy anymore. This isn't about who fits the job best. This is about racial justice. We have affirmative action, and your kid isn't the right race. And guess what? This applies to education as well. As you may know, there's been a number of lawsuits about discrimination. Asians tend to score the highest on the SATs and the ACTs here in the United States, and colleges want to create these diverse campuses, so they've been excluding and discriminating against Asians and to some degree whites. Take a look at this image. The data ultimately comes from the National Study of College Experience in 1997, looking at highly selective universities. The line in the center is white students, so we're the baseline in this case. If a black student applied to the school basically gave them a 310-point SAT bonus over white students. So if you had a clever white kid who scored 250 points higher than a black student, and he and that black student were competing for the same spot, the white kid lost. There's also a 130-point bonus to Hispanic people over white. And Asians, while they don't make up a significant portion of the population here in the United States, they do score so well on the SATs that they would fill up all the highly selected universities to a large degree if there wasn't discrimination against them. And again, these universities want diverse campuses, so they have to find a way to keep the Asian number down, so they have to discriminate against them even a little bit more than whites. Now, my question for you is this. Do you think since the 90s, colleges have been pushing diversity less? Do you think they care about diversity less now than they did in the 90s? The Los Angeles Times reported that the University of California president Janet Napolitano wants to suspend SAT and ACTs in admissions. And in fact, I just saw the tweets Thursday. They've passed that measure. So now there's going to be no requirement for SAT or ACT for admissions. And if they don't come up with a new standard by 2025, there just will be no standardized test. Now think about this. If a standardized tests are part of your admission process, and you have some high-scoring Asians and whites, and you don't let them in, you don't admit them, those Asian and whites have a legitimate complaint that they were a good fit and you excluded them because of their race. But if there's no test, if there's no real test, or if there's just a very open to interpretation sort of test, no right or wrong answers, all of a sudden it might be a lot harder to sue these colleges and universities to say that you met some sort of standard because they don't have any real standards anymore. They can discriminate a lot more easily to make sure they have a diverse campus, and they don't have to be bogged down by making sure that whites and Asians who try really hard and are intelligent, well, you don't have to let them in. They'll be able to just pick whoever fits the quotas the best. So how are you enjoying this? The lower pay, enjoying the higher home prices, higher mortgages? Are you happy about your kids having fewer educational opportunities, fewer job opportunities? And I'm not sure you're supposed to talk about immigration negatively anymore. Most immigrants now are non-whites. So if you talk about some of the real economic effects of mass immigration, you might get called racist. Ooh. And in the world we live in today, saying something politically incorrect about race, well, now you're canceled. Worse than a violent criminal, really. Check out my video, Race is Pre-Political, for more on that.